Welcome to Gaming Revisionist Histories, a new series here on Stone Age Productions where we revisit and question the consensus narrative surrounding past games. For each game we cover in this series, we will seek to rewrite a part of this narrative, uncover lost or overlooked gems of game design, and ultimately issue a correction to the historical record, with the hope of gaining a greater appreciation for these games and learning something valuable that can be applied in the development of future projects. The first game we'll be covering is 2013's Need for Speed Rivals, the first Need for Speed game of the Ghost Games era. When Rivals launched in the fall of 2013, its plethora of bugs and glitches, low detail map, and handling physics borrowed from the preceding game all indicated a very short and rushed development cycle. It was clear that the newly formed EA studio known as Ghost Games had been told that if they could just take 6 months to get out 2013's yearly entry, they would be given 2 years to work on their next game with an opportunity to reboot the series in 2015. One result of this highly compressed development cycle was that Rivals was a very bare-bones game, lacking depth and missing many features that longtime fans had been asking for, such as a wider variety of cars, deep customization, and a fleshed-out story. For that reason, it disappointed many players, especially after Most Wanted 2012 had also been lacking in several of those categories. While this disappointment was justified, it overshadowed the other result of the short development cycle, which is that Rivals was forced to be an extremely focused game that relied heavily on its well-thought-out fundamental design because Ghost simply didn't have the time to add distracting peripheral features. In fact, it's rare to see a game as self-aware as Rivals. It knew exactly what kind of game it was and what kind of experience it wanted to be. Unfortunately, after years of missed expectations for fans of the long-running series, this Need for Speed entry was simply the wrong game at the wrong time. But taken out of the context of a string of disappointments and judged on its own merits, Rivals was a surprisingly fun and replayable experience. Let's talk about a few of the things that made it an underappreciated gem. First, Rivals leaned heavily into one of the only things that continues to make Need for Speed a unique experience in the racing game genre, the battle between cops and racers. As exemplified in the name, this rivalry forms the core of the game's identity and directs every facet of its gameplay, atmosphere, and themes. The story, to the extent that there is one, is generic and forgettable, but it does enough to set the stage for the excellent core gameplay. Players are able to play as either cops or racers, experiencing both sides of the cat-and-mouse dynamic. Racers battle with each other for time and position in events, and have the advantage of being the leaders and forgers of the path. Cops, on the other hand, must rely on prediction and reaction, and thus are always on the back foot, but are capable of and actually encouraged to use extreme violence in putting a stop to racer activity when they have the chance. Giving players a full game's worth of progression on both sides of the rivalry makes Rivals a very replayable game with a surprisingly large learning curve. While the driving mechanics are simple and easy to master, especially since they feel nearly identical to those of NFS Most Wanted 2012, there's a large skill gap between the best and worst cops and racers driven by map knowledge, optimal use of pursuit tech, and an understanding of how the AI and other mechanics work. A lot of this is not explained by the game and is left for players to find out, such as how shockwaves can be used to clear road spikes and a jammer can cancel an opponent racer's turbo. Managing the limited health pools of cars can be a difficult task, and good decisions are rewarded while mistakes are punished brutally. Put simply, Rivals is a fun and gratifying game to learn, and the solid core gameplay makes you want to come back again and again, no matter which side you're on. Additionally, the speed point system of Rivals is a textbook case of excellent in-game economy design. Both cops and racers earn speed points for doing events, damaging and wrecking opponents, completing challenges, and collecting open-world activities. However, each side of the rivalry faces different incentives that encourage exactly the right playstyle for the respective roles. Cops automatically keep all of the speed points they earn, even if they wreck before returning safely to a command post, so the only penalty for depleting your car's health bar is the inconvenience of being reset to the garage. The result is that the rational playstyle for cops is balls-to-the-wall violence with enough excessive force to make Derek Chauvin look like Snow White. Shock ramming a racer into the wall at 200 miles per hour is literally a hobby for police in Redview County, and it's just as satisfying the 1000th time you do it as it was for the very first time. Meanwhile, racers only keep the speed points that they successfully bank at hideouts for every driving session, but they have the opportunity to exponentially increase their earnings with a multiplier that increases proportionately with their heat level. This means that the longer racers stay out of the garage, the bigger their payout, but surviving the onslaught of police officers also becomes more difficult with every minute that goes by. Players playing as racers must constantly evaluate the risk-reward trade-off, and here again, the game rewards smart decisions and harshly punishes missteps. The frantic, adrenaline-fueled pursuits at the highest level of this risk-reward matrix are insanely fun and addicting, and no other Need for Speed game has been able to match the intensity of these moments. Lastly, Need for Speed Rivals lives up to its name not just by encouraging antagonism between cops and racers, but by embracing competition between everyone and everything, even yourself. Every event, activity, and speed list comes with a leaderboard where you can see your own times and compare them to your friends. The autolog system provides speed point rewards for besting your peers, and constantly recommends new challenges for you to do in this category. To this day, I'm still salty that I lost my top spot on the Grand Tour race leaderboard, but even if you didn't have friends to play with, you could still work on improving your own times and completing the speed list challenges that you didn't do while completing the main story progression. This degree of competition and the rewards for completionism add a layer of depth that sadly went underutilized for many people, but was fulfilling to those who stuck around on Rivals. Now that we've taken a closer look at the underappreciated aspects of Need for Speed Rivals, let's conclude with what we can learn from its successes. First, a game should always have a core identity that informs the philosophy with which every other facet of the experience is designed. Rivals did this especially well by relying on something that set it apart from other racing games, namely the rivalry between racers and cops. The more unique this core identity can be, the better. The focus and clarity that Rivals achieved was refreshing in its own time, but even more so today when so many major games seem not to understand why they even exist. Next, a large learning curve and high skill gap doesn't have to be something that turns players away. This is easier said about single-player games than competitive multiplayer ones, but Rivals showed that having a fun core gameplay loop and properly rewarding increased skill with a sensible risk-reward setup encourages people to take the time to learn the game's mechanics without scaring them away too soon. Rivals also displayed the power of a relatively low skill floor by making the driving easier to master and placing most of the learning curve in the secondary mechanics of the game, another way that the game attracted low-skill players and kept them interested until they became higher-skill players. Additionally, Rivals showed the absolute necessity of a well-designed economy in games. Punishing recklessness on the part of racers but not on the part of cops evened the playing field in Rivals and is directly responsible for creating the high-quality cat-and-mouse dynamic that the game enjoyed. Also, generously rewarding players for taking on increased risk resulted in fun, high-intensity moments that every racing game should strive to recreate, especially future Need for Speed entries. If players aren't trembling with adrenaline by the time they finally come to rest in the garage, your game's economy isn't good enough yet. Finally, Rivals brilliantly taps into the insight that the player themselves is a source of content, if only they are given the proper tools and encouragement. Too many games in recent years seem to have completely forgotten this principle, instead trying to pad their playtime with artificially slow progression or overwhelming amounts of meaningless side activities and cosmetic unlocks. While Rivals certainly could have benefited from more peripheral features and content, time constraints forced the Ghost team to get creative, and they realized that rewarding the player for challenging their friends and themselves could tap into a deep well of player-driven content using what was already in the game. The historical consensus about Need for Speed Rivals says that it was a rushed game missing many features fans had been calling for, and was a disappointing and lackluster mess that yet again dropped the ball in a once great series of video games. While it's undeniable that the game was rushed and did not provide what fans were asking for, this narrative leaves out the things that Rivals got right, and sweeps under the rug those who enjoyed the core gameplay and surprisingly solid fundamentals of this resident on the island of misfit toys. Hopefully, this video rewrites a little part of the history books, and gives Rivals the recognition it rightfully deserves. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.